You know what? Star Trek fans are spoiled. We are. Maybe that's why some of us throw tantrums like little titty babies when we don't get exactly what we want. But think about this. Since Star Trek Discovery debuted a little over 9 years ago, there have been 6 TV series, or streaming series if you want to get technical about it. Star Trek fans aren't pedantic like that, though, right? Plus a shorts anthology, plus a direct-to-streaming movie. And in the 7 years leading up to the debut of Discovery, there were also 3 theatrical Star Trek films. That's a lot of Star Trek. Not all of it has been greeted with wide popular acclaim, to say the least. I haven't liked all of it, and I've positively disliked some of it, but my point is, there's been a whole bunch of Star Trek produced these last several years, and I have noticed a pattern. The creators of these latter-day Star Trek projects have developed a bad habit, a habit that must be pretty hard to break because it has negatively affected the quality of no less than 3 separate projects in this most recent era of Star Trek. Although, now that I think about it, it's not so much a habit as it is an impulse or a negative instinct. In one particular respect, the creators of modern Star Trek have become like baseball players who are afraid of the ball. Every time they're at bat and a pitch comes in that's a little too fast or a little too inside, they bail out. Only it's worse than that because the creators aren't just the batters, they're the pitchers too. They're bailing out on pitches they threw to themselves. It's frustrating. Allow me to elaborate. One of the foundational qualities of the franchise, one of the things that makes Star Trek, is its penchant for political and social commentary. From the very beginning of the original series in the late 1960s, Star Trek has been a vehicle for stories that challenged the audience to look closer at injustice in society and at their own prejudices and assumptions. The show, in all of its many forms, has always been staunchly anti-war, anti-racism, anti-sexism, and unabashedly diverse and inclusive. When conservatives were demonizing multiculturalism as an existential threat, and when haven't they been doing that, Star Trek was championing multiculturalism as the key to a better, brighter future. Most of the time, the creators of Star Trek shows make their points about political or social issues indirectly through metaphor, allegory, or analogy. Instead of writing an episode about the madness of the Vietnam War, they wrote stories about the Federation and the Klingon Empire fighting proxy wars over strategically important planets. Instead of writing about the threat of real-world fascists, the creators of Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine invented the Cardassians and the Dominion, and showed them operating from the same playbook as the Nazis. The creators of Deep Space Nine introduced a new wrinkle to this method, one they would never have gotten away with had franchise founder Gene Roddenberry still been alive. They occasionally presented the good guys of the show, Starfleet and the Federation, as imperfect, hypocritical, and even dangerously flawed. This yielded some of the best episodes of that series, especially once a war between the Federation and the Dominion became the dominant ongoing storyline, and the distinctions between the two sides became just a bit harder to make out. Contemporary Star Trek projects have adopted this approach as well, showing us a warts and all image of Starfleet and the Federation that from certain angles bears little resemblance to the benevolent and always well-intentioned organizations we see throughout most of TNG, and this, I must say, is good. I want the Federation and Starfleet to be imperfect institutions. I want to see them acting hypocritically and failing to live up to their stated ideals. I know there are many of my fellow Trekkies who feel exactly the opposite and rebel at any suggestion that Starfleet and the Federation are anything less than virtuous and righteous, but I think those Trekkies have become so attached to these fictional institutions that they have forgotten what those institutions represent. This is where I remind you, and no, I don't give a fuck what Andy Weir has to say on the subject, that Star Trek is not about aliens in outer space in the future. It's about us on planet Earth right now. The Federation and Starfleet are stand-ins for the United States, or if you'd prefer a slightly broader interpretation, Western civilization. And a few things about Western civilization that you might have noticed. It is frequently not benevolent. well-intentioned, virtuous, or righteous. It is hypocritical. It fails to live up to its stated ideals. For most of its first 30 years, Star Trek was very good at framing its political and social messages in such a way so as to get the point across without cutting too close to the bone. If an episode dealt with intolerance, it was usually through the backward society of one of the planets our Starfleet heroes were visiting that week. We in the audience identified with the heroes, so we weren't the intolerant ones. They were. The ones on that fucked up planet. Those people over there. The drawback to that approach is that it fosters smugness and allows us to remain blissfully ignorant of our own prejudices and biases and of the flaws in our own institutions. We're not the bad guys. They are. Our society doesn't need to change. Theirs does. Classic Star Trek and TNG did deviate from this norm a few times, but Deep Space Nine was the first Star Trek show to make a point of it, and it is very much to the credit of the creators of the more recent Star Trek shows that they have made a point of it too. The problem is, the creators of the recent Star Trek shows, they aren't great at following through. They keep setting up sharp, pertinent critiques of the Federation or Starfleet, and by analogy of the United States or the West in general, and then pulling up short before the end. Current-era Star Trek shows have done this 3 times that I can think of. If you watch the rest of this video and have an example that I'm missing, please share it with me in the comments. The first example of this problem occurs in Season 1 of Star Trek Picard. The entire Picard series is fraught with problems from start to finish. The first season is not the worst, but it is possibly the most frustrating because it contains the most unrealized promise. The creators of Season 1 of Picard had plenty that they wanted to say, but seemingly no idea how to say it. The season begins in the aftermath of 2 large-scale tragedies. First, an attack on Mars by a gang of rogue androids that resulted in thousands of deaths and the destruction of thousands of Starfleet ships. And second, a supernova that destroyed the Romulan homeworld, leaving the surviving Romulan population to exist as refugees. If you haven't watched the Picard series, first of all, good for you. Keep making smart choices. You might wonder how either of those events reflect poorly on Starfleet or the Federation, and the answer is they don't, but how Starfleet and the Federation responded to them does. The response to the android attack on Mars was to ban the creation of synthetic life forms. The androids who carried out the attack were worker drones, sophisticated but not sentient. However, the synth ban, as it was called, applied to all synthetic life forms, sentient or not. Because sentient androids had previously been recognized as entitled to the same rights as organic beings, the synth ban amounted to declaring it illegal for one particular class of people to reproduce, all in response to the offenses of a relative few. The attack on Mars and the damage it caused to Starfleet also led to the Federation canceling its monumental effort to evacuate the Romulan homeworld in advance of the supernova. The ships destroyed in the Mars attack were being readied to travel to Romulus and relocate the population before the supernova occurred. After the fleet was destroyed, however, the Federation decided that evacuating the Romulans, who were longtime enemies, from their doomed planet was not worth continued effort, and canceled its plans. The Romulan star did eventually go supernova, destroying Romulus, forcing the remaining Romulans to disperse throughout the galaxy. Banning the creation of an entire category of person because of one terrorist attack, and choosing to abandon the inhabitants of a hostile nation to die or at least be made homeless in a catastrophic natural disaster are both pretty heinous decisions that show the Federation and Starfleet to be far less admirable than they seemed to be in previous iterations of Star Trek. The cold, political calculating, and callous disregard for the lives of people determined to be disposable feels uncomfortably familiar to me as an American, especially when I recall the last decade or so of my country's history. Season 1 of Picard was produced during the first Trump administration, which saw attempts to ban Muslims from entering the country and brutal enforcement of immigration policies. And the series was released right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, during which as many as 30 million people worldwide died, including 1.2 million people in the United States under the inept leadership of President Trump, who more than anything else seemed annoyed that most people weren't willing to just pretend the pandemic wasn't happening. So the unflattering portrayal of the Federation and Starfleet felt timely. It felt true. It felt like Star Trek doing what it has always done at its best, saying what needs to be said. But then, like most of the other interesting ideas introduced in the series, that biting bit of commentary got lost in the clutter. When it came back to the forefront in the final episodes, it was only so the creators could sand off the edges and make sure that we in the audience knew who we should really be mad at. And it wasn't Starfleet or the Federation, it was the Romulans. Yeah, the ones whose planet had been destroyed, the ones who were now scattered throughout the galaxy living as refugees, the ones the Federation didn't want to help because they were the bad guys. Turns out, good call, Federation. They were the bad guys. The show doesn't make it that black and white. We are shown glimpses of the plight of the Romulan refugees, and we are invited to empathize with them. And the lead protagonist, Jean-Luc Picard, very much wanted to help the Romulans leading up to the destruction of their planet, and eventually resigned from Starfleet in protest after the evacuation mission was canceled. But it turns out, spoiler alert for season 1 of Star Trek Picard, I guess, if you haven't watched it but are planning to at some point, in which case I retract my earlier compliment about making smart decisions. Anyway, it turns out that Commodore O, the Vulcan head of security, is half Romulan and infiltrated Starfleet years ago as a secret agent of a shadowy Romulan cult which believed synthetic life forms would someday destroy all organic life in the galaxy. O believed so strongly in the danger posed by synthetic life forms that she orchestrated the android attack on Mars, knowing it would likely lead to Starfleet abandoning its rescue efforts on Romulus, because she felt convincing the Federation to outlaw synthetic life was that much more important. And it worked. After the attack on Mars, the synth ban was swiftly put into place. So it's not that the leaders of the Federation and Starfleet were prejudiced, cold-hearted reactionaries. It's that they were misled by a dastardly Romulan. If you think about it, the revelation that O was behind the Mars attack does nothing to redeem the subsequent actions of Starfleet and the Federation. The Mars attack, as devastating as it is shown to be, is still no excuse for outlawing the existence of an entire class of person, and the Federation was still wrong to give up its relief efforts on Romulus. The evacuation fleet was destroyed, but Picard had a backup plan to recommission mothballed ships from other Starfleet shipyards to conduct the evacuation instead. However, that plan was rejected. The thing is, though, the show wants to redeem Starfleet and the Federation at the end, so a couple of things happen to make us, hopefully, forget about the synth ban and the abandonment of the Romulans. First, when a secret Romulan fleet led by O shows up to wipe out the androids living on a secret android planet in the final episode, that fleet is opposed by Starfleet, which arrives in force, led by none other than Captain Riker, who has come out of retirement to ride to the rescue of his old friend Picard. Romulans are the bad guys. Starfleet heroically saves the day, same as it ever was. Second, it is mentioned offhandedly in the last scene of the last episode of the season that the synth ban has been repealed. Yay! Well, I guess that's over. Everything is back the way it was before. By the beginning of season 2, Picard has even returned to Starfleet. All that business about the Federation and Starfleet giving in to fear, turning their backs on billions of people in desperate need, water under the bridge. We in the audience are meant to see it as a happy ending, as Starfleet and the Federation correcting their mistakes and becoming once again the beacons of justice and morality they were always said to be. But it's a little bit like if Congress had repealed the Patriot Act on George W. Bush's last day in office and everybody acted like the previous 8 years didn't happen, you know? Hey, we never did repeal the Patriot Act, did we? Huh. Anyway, that was the first example. The second example comes from the third season of my favorite of the current era Star Trek shows, Strange New Worlds, and an episode titled What is Starfleet? One of the ongoing plot threads leading up to this episode involves Beto Ortegas, the younger brother of the Enterprise's senior helm officer, Lieutenant Erica Ortegas. Beto is a filmmaker, and he's been aboard the Enterprise all season shooting a documentary. Finally, in this episode, the 7th of the season, we get to see Beto's documentary, and you know what? It's pretty good. Up to a certain point. Beto isn't a member of Starfleet, and he presents the events of the episode from the perspective of a skeptical journalist. He doesn't take the moral superiority of Starfleet for granted. In his interviews with the Enterprise crew, he poses probing questions. He forces them to explain their decisions and defend the proposition that they are the good guys. He challenges the notion that Starfleet and the Federation are fundamentally different from their enemies. The specific mission on which Beto's documentary and the episode center involves the Enterprise delivering a weapon to a planet that is at war with a neighboring world. Captain Pike and his crew soon discover that the weapon is actually a living creature that has been exploited by the people the Enterprise is supposed to be helping. At first, Pike grits his teeth and tries to carry out the mission as ordered, but the creature soon breaks free and starts attacking the Enterprise as well as other ships in order to defend itself. After a couple of nasty scrapes with the creature, the crew is able to make psychic contact with it, and they learn that the creature is tired of being used as a weapon and just wants to die. The Enterprise escorts the creature to the center of the star system, where it flies itself into the sun. Captain Pike also lays down the law to those aliens they were sent to help and tells them that they'd better not enslave any more creatures to use as weapons, or they'll have to answer to Starfleet. And that's all well and good. A classic Star Trek moral dilemma, to follow orders or to protect the exploited creature regardless of the consequences. Captain Pike setting his conscience aside to play it by the book until finally he's had all he can stands and he can't stands no more and does the right thing. No problem there. The problem comes when it's revealed that the reason Beto was going so hard at Starfleet for most of his documentary is because he resents it for taking his big sister away. Erica left her family to risk her life for Starfleet, and Beto doesn't like that, and he's got some really big feelings about it. And that's why he said all those mean things about how Starfleet is a colonizing military force. He was just mad, and he misses his sister a whole bunch. Then, all the crew members Beto has been interviewing are allowed the last word, and they all paint a picture of Starfleet as a family, where everyone looks out for each other, everyone has the potential to be the best that they can be, and as number one says, their mission is to bring light and warmth and hope to the cold and darkness of space. What separates a Federation from an empire and a starship from a warship, Beto asks in the closing moments of his documentary? His final answer? The people. As Uhura says in the final shot, we make Starfleet what it is, not the other way around. Oh, well, never mind all those valid and mostly unanswered critiques Beto was making earlier, I guess. It's okay, everyone. The people are nice. If it ever starts to look like Starfleet or the Federation are flawed or problematic in some way, don't sweat it. The people are nice. What, and I say this as someone who is a lifelong fan of Star Trek in general and a fan of this series in particular, a load of horseshit. All of Beto's previous questions and concerns about Starfleet and the Federation are swept aside as the product of his emotional resentment towards Starfleet for taking his sister away. The implication being that the only reason anyone would question the benevolence of these wonderful institutions is if they had a personal axe to grind. And the episode ends with Beto joining the crew, his documentary subjects, for one of Captain Pike's dinner parties, which I'm sure was a lot of fun for Beto, but in this context, it plays like a journalist who has been ideologically captured by the people he's been reporting on. The questions Beto raises about Starfleet and the Federation, and by extension, the West, the United States, our military, etc., are valid and deserve to be taken seriously. Instead, the closest any of the other characters gets to actually addressing Beto's concerns is when Uhura tells him that it's good for him to question things, because nobody should just accept things blindly. Then the very next thing she says to him is to invalidate his entire project, because the truth is it was all about him being worried about his sister. It's good to ask questions, but then every question you ask is rejected as invalid. Hey, look, we're not perfect. We make mistakes, but every mistake you bring up is explained away. It's the tactic people use when they want to create the impression that they're open-minded and skeptical, but don't actually want to acknowledge that anything is wrong. It is a shallow parody of critical thinking, and it's the last thing I want to see Star Trek encouraging in its audience. Captain Pike, in the scenes where he is interviewed by Beto, comes across as evasive and paternalistic. He points out Beto's youth and lack of experience and suggests that if Beto were a little older and had seen some of the things Pike has seen, he might not be asking the questions he's asking. And I have no problem with Pike saying that. I have no problem with any of the Enterprise crew saying anything they say, really. But I do have a problem with how, ultimately, Beto and his documentary, and therefore this episode of the series, fully adopts their point of view as though it's the truth. The episode starts out playing at being thought-provoking and ends up playing like propaganda. It's one of the most frustrating episodes of any recent Star Trek series. That was the second example. The third example comes from the first season of Star Trek Starfleet Academy, a show which I am also a fan of. I mostly really liked the first season, the only season that has been released at the time I'm making this video. Unfortunately, like season 1 of Star Trek Picard and the What is Starfleet episode of Strange New Worlds, the first season of Starfleet Academy sets up a sharp critique of the Federation and Starfleet and, by analogy, of the real-life institutions they represent, then stumbles spectacularly just before it reaches the finish line. Starfleet Academy is set following the final season of Star Trek Discovery in the late 32nd century, as the galaxy is just starting to emerge from a dark age caused by a cataclysm known as the Burn. During the previous century, long-distance space travel was difficult, resources were limited, entire sections of the galaxy were cut off from one another, and the once mighty Federation contracted into an alliance of a relative handful of worlds. Times were tough all over. The first episode opens with our lead protagonist, Captain Ake, committing an act that will haunt her for the rest of the season. She is presiding over a hearing involving two criminals, Noose Braca and Anisha Mir, who were caught after robbing a Starfleet supply ship. It's really Braca who is responsible. Anisha was his accomplice and went along with it because she was desperate to get food for herself and her young son Caleb. However, during the robbery, Braca killed a Starfleet officer, and even though Anisha wasn't directly responsible for the officer's death, her involvement in the crime results in her being convicted of felony theft and sentenced to a Federation rehabilitation colony. Anisha is separated from her son, who, Captain Ake says, will become a ward of the Federation. Anisha is led away by guards, yelling to Caleb, warning him never to trust them, meaning Starfleet. Soon after, clever little Caleb escapes Captain Ake's custody and disappears. Ake is so disgusted by the situation that she resigns from Starfleet. She only returns when, 15 years later, she is told by her old friend Admiral Vance that Caleb has been located after being arrested and thrown into a brutal alien prison. Ake is offered reinstatement to Starfleet and the position of Chancellor of Starfleet Academy, and she goes and picks up Caleb from that alien prison and takes custody of him, enrolling him as a cadet in the Academy as a condition of his release. The weight of guilt and responsibility carried by Ake over separating Caleb from his mother is evident throughout the rest of the season, as is Caleb's well-earned skepticism of the Starfleet party line. Caleb has experienced firsthand how coldly Starfleet and the Federation can dispense with people they judge to be not worth the trouble. Ake uses her regret over separating Caleb and Anisha to fuel her efforts to help rebuild the Federation and to teach her crop of young cadets the ideals of Starfleet so they can be the foundation of a newer, better Starfleet. It all works pretty well for most of the season, on a dramatic level as well as a thematic one. The ways in which the Federation and Starfleet are shown to have fallen short have clear parallels to inhumane policies maintained by the United States and other Western nations toward immigrants and refugees, minority groups, people living in poverty, and other categories of the underprivileged. The premise of a generation of young people inheriting a broken world which they will have to restore while correcting the mistakes of their parents and grandparents resonates with the current state of affairs here in the US especially, but also pretty much everywhere else. Then we get to the season finale and the show shits the bed. Overall, it's not a bad episode. There's some really good character stuff, and dramatically things resolve in a mostly satisfying way, but the season-long critique of Starfleet and the Federation disappears in a poof. Suddenly, Captain Ake, who has been captured by Noose Braca and forced to represent the Federation as Braca puts it on trial, is arguing that, given the difficult circumstances everyone was facing at the time, Starfleet and the Federation didn't do anything wrong. Ake even goes back to the event that compelled her to quit Starfleet, the separation of Anisha and Caleb, and turns it around on Anisha, blaming her for participating in a crime with Braca that led to the death of a Starfleet officer. Ake does briefly acknowledge her own responsibility in what happened to Anisha and Caleb, but the picture she paints isn't one where a powerful institution separated a parent from her child and handed down an excessive punishment to a person who turned to crime out of desperation, but one where, times were tough and maybe we all made mistakes. I found it kinda gross. As with the first two examples, the lasting impression is the crucial bit. After repeatedly inviting us to ponder the failures of Starfleet and the Federation and showing us characters like Ake and Caleb who embody the consequences of those failures, the season finishes by emphasizing how much Anisha, the starving mother, was responsible for what happened to her and Caleb, and also by reminding us that the real enemy is Noose Braca, the vengeful space pirate who nearly commits a galactic-scale mass murder. As for the Federation and Starfleet, they're the good guys. They were making the best of a bad situation, and hey, they gave Caleb a home where he could be himself and find a new family. The people in Starfleet know who they are and what they believe in. Caleb gives a big speech that would have fit perfectly in the What is Starfleet episode of Strange New Worlds. The previously examined shortcomings of the institutions are invalidated by the loyalty and virtue and good intentions of the people who serve those institutions. New face, same horseshit. So what gives? Why has the current era of Star Trek developed this hitch in its swing, so to speak? Are the creators afraid of showing the Federation and Starfleet in too negative a light? Are they being pressured from the studio to tone down the bits that are obviously critical of the US government? I don't think it's that last one. In the last episode of Season 1 of Starfleet Academy, they do everything but hang a sign on Noose Braca that reads, "Trump stand-in." If it's that first one, that they're skittish about showing the Federation and Starfleet in a bad light, that's frustrating because there are numerous examples of other Star Trek shows depicting Starfleet and or the Federation as imperfect institutions without portraying them or what they represent as monolithically evil. The obvious place to start is Deep Space Nine, which produced numerous episodes of this sort. Inquisition and Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis, where Dr. Bashir crosses paths with an agent of Section 31, a rogue intelligence division that operates completely outside the law and which is tacitly tolerated by Starfleet Command, which pretends it doesn't exist. In The Pale Moonlight, where Captain Sisko works with Garrick to trick the Romulans into allying with the Federation in the war against the Dominion, a scheme which eventually makes Sisko an accomplice to several serious crimes, including the murder of a Romulan senator. Homefront and Paradise Lost, a two-parter that shows how easily a few highly placed officials can use the threat of enemy infiltration to nudge the Federation into authoritarianism. A few years before DS9 started on TNG, there was the episode The Drumhead, in which a respected retired Starfleet admiral becomes the leader of a witch hunt aboard the Enterprise, convinced that everyone from a medical technician to Captain Picard himself is involved in a conspiracy with the Romulans. That episode doesn't indict the institution of Starfleet itself, but it does illustrate the danger that all institutions and all societies face when an influential person starts up a moral panic. There are also episodes from various Trek shows which suggest Federation society isn't as tolerant and inclusive as it likes to think it is. In TNG's The Measure of a Man and The Offspring, and Voyager's Author, Starfleet and the Federation have to be talked into recognizing the civil rights of people who are different. Sentient androids and holograms in these cases. In the Deep Space Nine episode Dr. Bashir, I presume, and the Strange New Worlds episode Ad Astra per Aspera, we see that Starfleet and the Federation still explicitly discriminate against genetically engineered people, allowing only narrow exceptions for certain individuals who just so happen to be main characters on their respective series. You can even find examples as far back as the original series. Take the episode Errand of Mercy, in which the Federation and the Klingons, represented by Captain Kirk and Kor, compete to gain control of the strategically valuable planet Organia. Though their methods differ, the episode makes it clear that both sides are guilty of trying to gain control of an independent planet in order to gain an advantage on their enemy. And in the end, the Organians, who turn out to be powerful godlike beings, naturally, place blame equally on the Federation and the Klingons for being aggressive and warlike. The allegory, with the Federation representing the US and the Klingons representing the Soviet Union, comes through even more clearly here than in later Star Trek series, because at this early point, the specifics of the Federation haven't been as firmly established, so it's obvious that it's a stand-in for the United States. These episodes and others reveal Starfleet and the Federation as flawed, sometimes troublingly flawed organizations, corrupted or at least easily corruptible, and show Federation society to be not quite the oasis of absolute equality and acceptance that it has often been presented as. It remains a better, brighter future, but it also still has lots of room for improvement. Starfleet and the Federation are shown to be imperfect, not irredeemable. These episodes also manage to tell their stories without chickening out on the political and social commentary in the last few minutes and pivoting to a celebration of all the good stuff about Starfleet and the Federation, so that the audience finishes with a warm, fuzzy feeling about the institutions that were just being questioned. Imagine if Errand of Mercy had ended with Captain Kirk making a comeback on the Organians and delivering a rousing, patriotic speech about how great the Federation was. It would feel like the episode had missed its own point, wouldn't it? Star Trek is different things at different times. It doesn't always use Starfleet or the Federation to comment on the United States or the West or some other real-world entity. It's fine to present Starfleet as a positive force and the Federation as an evolved utopian society, but I do think it's important for Star Trek to continue to challenge us in the audience to see the flaws and shortcomings and corruption and crimes and abuses in our institutions, our governments, our societies, and to push for necessary change. Star Trek is not only a vehicle for social commentary, but it is a vehicle for social commentary, and it has been from the very start. One of the most effective ways to use that critical lens to bring real problems into focus is by turning it towards Starfleet and the Federation and letting us see our flaws reflected in theirs. All I ask of the creators of Star Trek is this: if you're going to do it, go all the way with it. Don't start an episode with commentary and critique and end it with a commercial. Don't show us ambiguity and complexity and then paper them over with simplicity. If you're not going to answer the question, don't ask. If you're not going to thoughtfully and meaningfully address the issue, don't raise it. But as the franchise moves into whatever the next few years will bring, I sincerely hope that you do ask those questions and you do raise those issues. Now more than ever, we need Star Trek to use its voice and to speak loudly and without fear.